This is a commentary on the song Every Dollar Carries Trouble of Its Own, which was published in 1905. This is probably going to be a long one, so I think I'll break it into two parts. Let's see. Because of the way this song is written, specifically referring to things and people from that time period of 1905, it could seem very dated. But on the other hand, it contains a lot of history from that period, and therefore I think it could be used as a learning experience. So before I go into details about the song, I thought I'd just take a look at 1905 in general. The year 1905 saw actual negative inflation or deflation, which is something we haven't experienced in a long time. I'm no expert on economics, but from what I've read, it looks like this could have been caused by both a shortage in currency and a huge increase in industrial and agricultural productivity. During this time, the United States was still on the gold standard for its currency, meaning that money was made from actual gold and for lesser denomination coinage from silver. This can mean that if there was a shortage of gold to create new coins, the existing coins would become worth more, causing negative inflation. And I'll touch on this again later when commenting about the people mentioned in this song. Also during this time, there was a big increase in both industrial and agricultural productivity, thanks to new sources of power such as combustion engines and electricity, and new methods of production such as the assembly line. Farmers were able to produce more food due to new farming equipment that used combustion engines, plowing fields with tractors instead of mules, and so forth. This huge increase in production can mean that there are more goods being produced than can be consumed, so that supply was greater than demand, and this can also cause negative inflation. However, there was also a big increase in available workers, which kept wages low for many people. The 10 per week mentioned in the song, adjusted for today's inflation, is worth only about $314 in 2021 dollars. So Mr. Jenkins and his wife would just barely be getting along, not able to buy their own car, but able to afford the trolley fare. Even 4 years later, when the Model T would be available for $825, this would still be about 9 months' wages for the Jenkinses. In 1905, there was no income tax. Whatever money the Jenkinses made, they kept. There were no national sales taxes, and from what I've read, 10 per week is lower than the average and is a good sign that Mr. Jenkins maybe wasn't trying very hard. 10 per week would be about $520 per year, and I read that the average expenses for most was around $350 per year, leaving a surplus or savings of $170 per year. And again, from what I've read, the average income should have been closer to $700 or more per year. At 10 per week, the Jenkins would still have been able to rent or buy a perfectly decent little house to live in, but they definitely would not have been able to buy a couple of hotels. So the song starts with Mrs. Jenkins, or Liza, as she's called in the song, complaining legitimately that Mr. Jenkins lied to her about how much money he had, or how much he was going to have. Apparently, he even told her that he already owned an auto, but didn't. He couldn't buy her diamonds, he didn't have a summer home, but he had a steady, reliable job that enabled them to eat 3 square meals a day and have a place to stay, even though they were poor. Now that I've gotten all that out of the way, I'll go into details about the song itself. First of all, Leighton and Layton, shown as the writers of this song on the cover, are, to the best of my knowledge, not actually two people named Leighton, but are actually one man named Bert Leighton, who also wrote Frankie and Johnny and Steamboat Bill, which was used in the first Mickey Mouse short Steamboat Willie, and several other songs, and I couldn't find any photos of Bert Leighton. The Waldorf Hotel. The Waldorf Hotel was originally built in 1893 on 5th Avenue in New York by William Waldorf Astor on the site of his father's, John Jacob Astor's, mansion. It was apparently built there because of a feud between William's branch of the family and his aunt's branch of the family. His aunt, Carolyn Webster Schermerhorn Astor, lived right next door to where he built the hotel. It was at first thought to be a failure because of its poor location and high prices, but it soon became a great success, and earned around $4.5 million in its first year, which would be more than $138 million in 2021 dollars. Carolyn Astor later moved, and another hotel was built on the site of her house called the Astoria Hotel. A special alley was designed that allowed patrons to easily walk from one to the other, nicknamed Peacock Alley because of all the finely dressed persons who were seen there, and the two hotels came to be known as the Waldorf Astoria. From the very beginning, they were both luxury hotels with a telephone in every room, opulent furnishings, and first-class room service, affordable only by the very wealthy. They were both demolished in 1929 for the construction of the Empire State Building. The new Waldorf Astoria was built on Park Avenue where it is today. Financial backing for the new hotel was provided during the earlier part of 1929 when things were still looking good and the Great Depression had not yet hit. The St. Regis Hotel was opened in 1904. By that time, the popularity of the Waldorf Astoria had somewhat declined because it was too far away from the center of business and tourism. So John Jacob Astor IV, who was half owner of the Waldorf Astoria at that time, built the St. Regis on East 55th Street in Manhattan, where it was much more in the center of activity. And, of course, it was very successful and still there. And it was another luxury hotel, just like the Waldorf Astoria, with the telephone in every room and all that stuff, just like that. 5-cent Cremos. This took a little looking around, but I found that the Cremo was a very popular 5-cent cigar. In 1905, when the song was published, the cigar was still vastly more popular than the cigarette, and the Cremo was somewhat different from most cigars in that they were machine-rolled instead of being rolled by hand like most other cigars. Cigar usage peaked around 1920, but then began to suffer from image problems because of cigar-smoking gangsters depicted in many movies of the time. In 1929, the American Tobacco Company, which made Cremo cigars, began an ad campaign. This is kind of funny and disgusting. They began an ad campaign now known as the Spit Campaign. They released these ads in many newspapers. It showed a picture of a man sealing a cigar with his own spit, advertising that the Cremo cigars were made by machines and were sanitary since they weren't sealed with someone's spit. This was deemed an unfair attack by many other cigar manufacturers and even the Better Business Bureau. But it was a successful ad campaign, and by 1931, the Cremo had become the #1 selling 5-cent cigar in the nation. By the way, a 5-cent cigar would cost $1.57 in today's money, which I would consider to be frighteningly cheap for any cigar. In spite of this successful ad campaign, the rise of cigarette use during the 1930s caused a corresponding and major decrease in demand for cigars, and the demand for cigars would never again reach its peak that it hit in the early 1920s. After this, we get a bunch of rich people mentioned in the song. First, we have Russell Sage. He was born in 1816 and died in 1906, only a year after this song was written. He was a financier, railroad executive, and politician who was very wealthy. In 1891, a man named Henry Norcross tried to kill him with a bomb made of dynamite, which Norcross carried on his person. The explosion killed Norcross and injured Sage and a clerk named William Laidlaw, Jr. Laidlaw sued Sage, claiming that Sage had used him as a human shield, and eventually won $43,000, which was later reversed. Sage earned the reputation as a miser because he refused to pay this relatively tiny sum, even with his great wealth. He had no children. His second wife, Olivia Slocum Sage, inherited his fortune after his death and used it for philanthropic purposes. She established the Russell Sage Foundation for the improvement of social and living conditions in the United States, and she also founded the Russell Sage College for Women in 1916. Morgan, J.P. Morgan, John Pierpont Morgan, who lived from 1837 to 1913, was a financier and a banker who had his hands in everything from railroads to steel and coal production. He was also a collector of books, paintings, and other art that he loaned or gave to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which he helped establish. He was also a benefactor of the Morgan Library and Museum, the American Museum of Natural History, and the British Museum, among many others. A detailed recount of his life is beyond the scope of this video, and I'm going to be saying that more than once. William Kissam Vanderbilt I lived from 1849 to 1920. Son of William Henry Vanderbilt, he was an heir to his father's fortune. He was a businessman, philanthropist, and breeder of thoroughbred horses. He also managed his family's railroad investments, and in 1879, after taking over P.T. Barnum's Great Roman Hippodrome, which was located on some railroad property by Madison Square Park, he renamed it Madison Square Garden. John D. Rockefeller lived from 1839 to 1937, business magnate and, you guessed it, philanthropist. He was born into a poor family but was able to go into several business partnerships by the age of 20 and focused on oil refining. He founded the Standard Oil Company. He's regarded as the wealthiest American of all time. During those early years of oil refining, most companies would keep only the kerosene, which was in greatest demand at the time, and dump everything else. Rockefeller used the leftover, quote, in quotes, gasoline. Gasoline was not in wide use at this time because cars with combustion engines weren't around yet. So he used the gasoline to fuel his refineries and sold everything else as lubrication oil, petroleum jelly, paraffin wax, tar, and various other petroleum byproducts. He didn't waste anything. He was also an abolitionist who founded many schools and colleges in the South for freed slaves. He had a long and controversial life and career, which again is beyond the scope of this video. I have not been able to determine why he could not eat pie. William Waldorf Astor, previously mentioned, lived from 1848 to 1919, was an attorney, politician, businessman, and philanthropist. Are they all philanthropists? No, they're not, as we will soon see. Responsible for the building of the original Waldorf Hotel, he was also a newspaper magnate. Hetty Green. Why must Hetty Green live her life alone? She lived from 1834 to 1916, and she was nicknamed the Witch of Wall Street. She was not known for being a philanthropist. During her later life, she was famous for being the richest woman in America and for her extreme miserliness, refusing to pay for hot water, and wearing the same old black dress over and over again until it was worn out before she would buy a new one. She was born into a wealthy whaling family, and at a young age was already handling her family's bookkeeping. She inherited a lot of money, but also invested very shrewdly and amassed a huge fortune. But she was infamous for using her money for nothing but making more money. She had 2 children and was actually living with her son at the time of her death. Her children inherited her fortune and apparently put it to good use. When her son died, his part of the fortune was inherited by his sister, and when she died in 1951, the remaining $200 million, worth more than $2 billion in today's money, was almost entirely donated to various colleges, churches, hospitals, and other charities. Theodore Roosevelt, also known as Teddy Roosevelt, or TR, lived from 1859 to 1919. He was a politician, conservationist, naturalist, historian, author, and 26th President of the United States. His life is far beyond the scope of this video, but if you don't know about him, look him up because he was a very interesting person. William Jennings Bryan lived from 1860 to 1925. He was a politician who ran for president 3 times but was never elected. However, he was Secretary of State under President Woodrow Wilson and a member of the House of Representatives representing Nebraska. He was behind a movement called the Free Silver Movement, which would have removed the U.S. from the gold standard and replaced gold coinage with cheaper silver. And since silver wasn't worth nearly as much as gold, this would cause inflation. He also favored an income tax. He was also an advocate for an 8-hour workday, a minimum wage, the right of unions to strike, women's suffrage, and prohibition. In 1924, he helped defeat a resolution condemning the Ku Klux Klan. So he was another controversial figure who was not known for being a philanthropist. Now, in the order of the song, the next person mentioned is Cassie Chadwick, but I'm going to skip over her for now and do her later. She's going to get her own video. Chauncey Depew, his real name was Chauncey Depew, lived from 1834 to 1928. He was an attorney, a businessman, a politician, and famous for his orations. His first wife, who died in 1893, had a son who died without any children. Depew married in 1901, 4 years before this song was published, but he and his second wife had no children. Nicholas II was Tsar at this time. Of course, he and his entire family were murdered by Bolsheviks in 1918. He did have one son, Alexei, who was among those murdered. So I don't know what this song is referring to by saying the Tsar just had to steal one for his throne. And finally, William Randolph Hearst lived from 1863 to 1951. He was the son of a millionaire mining engineer and mine owner. Gold mined, that is. He was a businessman, newspaper publisher, and politician, founder of the media giant Hearst Communications, inspiration for the main character in the movie Citizen Kane. His house in California, known as Hearst Castle, is now a state historical monument and has been designated a National Historic Landmark. I tried to get through that as fast as possible because I knew this was going to be long, and I didn't want to spend too much time detailing any one person. So if you need more details on any of the people mentioned, feel free to look them up. There's plenty of information. I found the most interesting thing, the bit about the Cremo cigars, and Hetty Green was kind of interesting, and Cassie Chadwick was especially interesting, which is why she gets her own video coming up in part 2. But before I go, I need to make one little addendum. Now, I had assumed that the Astor mentioned in this song, as an Astor needs a change of climate, was William Waldorf Astor, who built the original Waldorf Hotel. But based on the time in 1905, it could have also been a reference to John Jacob Astor IV, who built the St. Regis Hotel, as I already mentioned. And, of course, as part of the Astor family, he was very wealthy. He was a business magnate and successful investor and all that stuff. And he's also notable in that John Jacob Astor IV, died in the sinking of the Titanic.